Hello everybody, this is Barry Johns and welcome back to another edition of Studio Talk. This is a channel where we talk about all things project studio driven for guys like us who just have our studios in our home, and it's a passion of mine, and it's probably a passion of yours as you're watching this. So today we're going to talk about microphone preamps. So far, depending on where you are in your journey, I'm going to assume that maybe you've not gone down the road of purchasing dedicated microphone preamps to increase the quality of your recordings. So let's talk about microphone preamps found on your typical interface, all right? So typically, they're either 2-channel interfaces, 4-channel interfaces, or mostly out there 8-channel interfaces. And so at the end of the day, when you make your choice of interface, obviously budget has to be the first thing you consider. It is much wiser to buy an interface with a fewer number of microphone preamps that gives you better analog to digital conversion, and as well as other additional features that you can find useful in your project studio. So, depending on where you're at, whether you've got 2, 4, or 8, or expanded beyond that, let's talk about the microphone preamps that you find in your typical interface. As with anything in what we do, ultimately, the more you spend, the higher quality you're going to get. So if you buy a $300 or $400 interface, that's what you're ultimately going to get. Now, can you make great recordings with the $300 or $400 interface? Sure you can. Sure you can. Can you make better recordings with a more expensive interface, or should I say a higher quality interface? That ultimately the reason it's more expensive is because it's higher quality. Yes, you can. And so ultimately, what I would encourage all of you to do before you consider trying to add on microphone preamps to your existing interface, that you really feel comfortable that you're getting the very best you can. You know, you experiment with levels, you experiment with high pass filters if yours have them built into your interface. You start to understand phase and how those things work, interacts between microphones. Phase is not as much of a microphone preamp, but I'm just trying to say, make sure you're already in a position where you feel comfortable that you've maximized what your interface can do for you today before you start expanding on it, whether that's adding additional dedicated microphone preamps, or whether that is adding outboard EQ or outboard compression, all right? We all love these pieces of hardware. They add a lot of character, as good as plugins have gotten today, and they have gotten incredibly well. They sound really good these days. You know, oftentimes a quality piece of hardware can make a positive difference in your recordings at home. So let's talk about, before we get into microphone preamps, let's talk about ways that you can expand your existing interface with additional microphone preamps, okay? So if you're not familiar with ADAT, that is a protocol that was invented by Alesis back in the 90s. Now, Alesis today is not the Alesis of back then. Alesis invented the ADAT recorder, which I happen to own one. Actually, I paid $2,800 for my first Alesis ADAT somewhere in probably the mid-90s. I actually bought it in Seoul, Korea when I was temporarily located on Yongsan Army Base. I was actually in the Navy, but I was sent there on temporary assignment. And I actually bought my ADAT there and shipped it back. Got a great deal on it in Seoul, Korea. So I thought I'd finally made it. Man, I was so excited to have that unit. By today's standards, you can probably pick up an ADAT for a couple $100. They're really not. At the time, they were the first foray. You had Pro Tools going at the time, but Pro Tools was outrageously expensive. And so those of us who are mere mortals, you know, we could, if we wanted to dabble in that, we could buy Alesis ADATs or Tascam devices, the DA88, which basically use 2 different types of medium to record that on. So I don't want to get too sidetracked, but Alesis invented the ADAT protocol. And so you've got three different widely used protocols for being able to transfer audio digitally. Once it gets converted from analog to digital, you want to do the best you can to keep things in the digital domain where you can. So you've obviously got SPDIF, which is typically used to do 2 channels. usually stereo in most situations. You've got AES, which is more of a high-end professional video, that type of digital transfer. You can get 8 channels of AES per AES connection. And then you have what's most commonly used on the vast majority of interfaces out there today, and that is the ADAT light pipe. Okay, so you can do up to 8 channels, up to 48 kilohertz on ADAT light pipe. So why does that matter to you? One of the first things you may want to consider, depending upon your needs, if you're in a situation to where you need to track live drums, oftentimes 8 mics is not going to get that done properly. Can you do it with 8 mics? Well, sure. A lot of great albums were made with 3 mics. You know, you could even get away, depending on the style of music, with 1 mic properly placed, depending on the drummer. That's not going to work for all drum kits. But ultimately, you want to individually mic each drum on the drum set, whether it's, typically it's 2 on the snare, 1 on each tom, 1 on the floor tom. It can be up to 3 on a kick drum, 1 a sub kick, 1 inside by the beater, and then 1 on the outside of the shell. Typically 1 mic over in your ride, 1 mic over in your hi-hat. Then you've got overheads and typically a room mic. That's typically how a drum kit is mic'd. So ultimately that will take you beyond your ability to be able to record all of that in the best way possible, ultimately with the right number of microphones. You can do more to it to do certain things, but in general, that's the what I just described is a fairly typical way. You can back off of that somewhat. You can back off the ride mic and just use the overheads for that. You can do that. And for some styles of music, that'll be perfectly fine. Okay, so I don't want to get too sidetracked on miking drums, but if your need is to record drums and you need additional microphone preamps, the first thing you want to look at probably is a dedicated 8-channel microphone preamp that has ADAT built into it. In other words, it can convert those 8 channels of mic preamps into digital, so you can transfer that over to your interface. So typically, let's say one of the best bangs out there for a high quality mic preamp out there, before you start going even higher and higher, would be the Audient pieces. Okay, I think the ASP 800, that's a fantastic unit for the price. And for drums, it's great. It does a good job. Now, there are individual mic preamps I'll talk about in a second that are better for that, but you're getting into more and more money. So if the first thing you need to do is really just be able to track a drum kit, and you need 8 channels ultimately, a good way to do that is to add something like the Audient ASP 800. Pretty sure that's the model number on that, which gives you that. So you would go ADAT light pipe out of the Audient piece into ADAT input on your interface. Now, many interfaces will have 2 ADATs in and out, and that's the way you could do an additional 16 channels. So you could do 2 of those as an example and give yourself 16 additional mic pre's, giving you up to 24. So that's one way of doing it, adding additional mic pre's. Microphone preamps are like anything else. The higher the quality, the better sound ultimately you're going to get. That's usually the case. That has been my experience. So those are things that you need to consider. Now, oftentimes, many of us start purchasing additional mic preamps because we want to add certain character or color, as people say. Oftentimes, it's used as warm, punchy, pristine, silky smooth, hi-fi. These are kind of terms that get used in microphone preamps. Now, can I tell you exactly what that means? No, I can't. I can't describe it other than doing that, but there are certain type of microphone preamps that fall into those categories. When you look at probably the most, well, before I get into actual brands of mic preamps, or I should say clones and why they're clones and what made them so famous. So ultimately, at the end of the day, there are different formats that you can buy mic preamps in. As I talked before about the Audient ASP 800, that is in a 19-inch rack mountable box, whatever you want to call it. And then you have the 500 series, which I'll show you. Hopefully I've got some video going of some of mine while I'm talking here, that you can kind of compact a bunch of different microphone preamps into a smaller footprint. And those are probably that's probably the most popular format for most people, because you can do so many different, either compressors or EQs, mic preamps, and that type of thing into that format, which was originally invented by API. All right. So let's talk about the typical flavors and the history of some of these microphone preamps. I think probably the most famous out there would be a Neve microphone preamp. Those are probably, if you've ever watched the rockumentary, or the studiomentary, as we should probably say it, Sound City, you will know that that is about that famous Neve board. It just had the sound. And a lot of that had to do, well, actually it had to do with a combination of mainly two things: the microphone preamps built into the console, and the EQ and the compression. I guess three things at the end of the day. But mainly the EQ and the microphone preamps is where you get the majority of character out of that board. So if you were to go buy an old microphone preamp or an old EQ out of an original Neve board, you'd be spending a ton of money, if you could even find one. They're incredibly rare to find these days, but they can be found. But that's out of touch for guys like you and me typically. So there have been quite a few manufacturers out there that do Neve clones. As an example, I have a Great River Neve clone, and they did a fantastic job of modeling the Neve preamp. And so it gives you that creamy vibe that you're going for. A really, really nice creamy vibe that that you quickly learn to appreciate once you start using one. And then, of course, next you've got API. Now, APIs are a different flavor altogether. API preamps are typically known as very punchy preamps. A lot of people choose API preamps for drums, for kick and snare, toms, etc., to give you that punchy kind of feeling, kind of almost more in your face. Oftentimes bass sounds good going through an API. Guitar can as well, but although I probably tend to navigate towards more of a Neve mic preamp when I'm micing guitar. Then you've got other famous consoles like Abbey Road, as well as Trident, and then even back in the day, Universal Audio. If I remember correctly, I think the first Van Halen album was recorded on a Universal Audio console. You've heard of the 610 preamp. That's a preamp modeled after the old consoles, and that also is a warm sounding microphone preamp. Not quite as popular as API or Neve. API and Neve are the most popular clones that exist today between most people. Then you've got certain preamps that will give you like that polished sound, where you think of something like an 80s A-Design Specifica. I mean, that is a fantastic mic preamp. Great on vocals, great on acoustic guitar. Anything you want that polished sound on, you're going to get that with something like that. And of course, there's many out there that do clones of Trident as well as the Abbey Road. Now, you also have a lot of manufacturers out there that want to make pristine preamps. For example, if you're recording an orchestra or things like that, or something where you just want a pristine recording of what comes in, comes out, Grace Designs are probably the most widely known for that. And so there are so many manufacturers out there that make amazing preamps. They all just have a different flavor, a different tonal characteristic to them, which is why you'll see people like myself and others who like to have a variety to pick and choose from. Now, let's talk variety for a second. My recommendation with microphone preamps is first start out with a Neve clone and then go to an API clone. Then after that, before you venture out into the others, I always recommend at least having a pair of each. As an example, remember I talked about that Audient ASP800 for drums. A good way to do that is be able to have two API mic preamps, have one on your primary kick and one on the most significant part of the snare, being the top part of the snare, to give you that bite, either the top or the bottom. You'd have to experiment with that to see where you liked it the best. But those are the two parts of a drum kit that are the most dominant, so that's where you'd put your priority. Then you can use the ASP800 on everything else, and it'll sound fantastic. Now, of course, if you can afford all API preamps, then go ahead and do that. But if you're trying to, kind of pick and choose how you're going to grow your microphone preamps, it's best to do it that way. For example, if you're recording acoustic guitar a lot, oftentimes that's done in an XY format or style for mic placement. And so that's when it's beneficial to have two microphone preamps that are the same character so that both of those microphones sound basically the same. So kind of keep that in mind as you're doing it. And then if you want to buy others for flavor, I think that's fine depending on what your budget allows. I think microphone preamps is buying a high-end, what I'm going to call a high-end microphone preamp. Is that going to immediately make a huge difference to you in your recordings? Probably not, because you have to learn how to appreciate what it's doing for you. And then once you learn to sense it, which is why I say, really learn how to use your existing preamps. Learn what they sound like. Really pay attention. I'm always going to drive that home. Really be analytical in every aspect of your recording chain and get to know it and get to understand the character. Then once you start to add these in, you will be able to quickly identify why it is that people go and buy these microphone preamps. Oftentimes they'll give you better headroom, lower noise floor, and then of course the character that they're going to add to it. Sometimes you may want to drive a microphone preamp really, really hard. Well, that's not going to sound very good on your audio interface. But if you drive a Neve or an API, you really kind of drive it into the red and sometimes almost to the borderline of distortion, you can get some really, really great tones out of that. And so you want to consider these things. So one thing that I want to caution you on, it's like, remember when I said with interfaces, yeah, you can go buy a $200 or $300 interface and make music with it. You can do the same thing with microphone preamps. I'm going to tell you, do not waste your money on something like that. There are a couple manufacturers out there that actually make, especially in the API preamp style, that can get you really good results and really be a step up of what you're currently using today on your interface. Warm Audio makes a great API 312 clone for the price. Then you've got another manufacturer called Cappy, which originally started out to be a build your own type, kind of assemble, solder your own PC board, all that stuff, and make your own microphone preamps, compressors, and EQs. Well, now you can buy them pre-assembled for you, and they are an incredible, incredible bang for the buck. Now, if you can swing it and go with a traditional API 512, then that is a great way to go. You can buy those individually in the 500 series, or of course you can buy a 4-channel one in a 19-inch rack. If you're really taking drums seriously and you really want to get it, then I would say save up your money. But on average, a quality microphone preamp is going to run you roughly $800 to $1,000 per channel. Okay, now that's a lot of money and may scare some of you off. You may only be able to get one additional microphone preamp. And so when it comes to things like this is why I always, always, always recommend that you buy used wherever you can. Sites like Reverb's primarily used today. eBay is not used anywhere near as much as it is, basically because they gouge the living daylights out of all of us and charge insane percentages for selling expensive gear. And it just didn't make sense. So Reverb has turned into the best place to buy and sell gear, at least across wherever you live. Now, of course, Craigslist and other things locally are an option, but oftentimes you deal with a lot of hassle from that. So ultimately, with sites like Reverb as an example, you can choose to see, so let's say, for example, you search for an API 512, and then you say, only show me the sold completed listings. And then you can get a rough idea of what they sold for. I usually do that search and say, show me only used, okay, no new, only show me used. And then go and look at that to get a feel for what they're going for. And you can plan your budget based upon roughly that. You can get a good idea of what to expect to pay for one. So at the end of the day, let's say, for example, you go out and your first one is an API 512. Well, and then you realize, well, maybe I can only afford one. Maybe that's not the right one for me. Then you just sell the thing. Okay, you're pretty much going to get most of your money back. You're going to pay your commission to Reverb, pay your commission to PayPal or wherever that goes to. And then ultimately, you might lose, 10% off of it or something like that, but you should be able to get your money right back. So what have you got to lose? And you can try different things that way. So you really want to explore to get a feel for the different types. My usual first recommendation is a Neve style clone. And there are many great companies out there that make those. I mean, obviously, Neve makes theirs, but they're more expensive. You're gonna pay a lot more per channel for when they're trying to emulate, like the preamps back in the consoles back in the day. But then you've got probably the best out there, honestly. If you really want the best when it comes to that, BAE is just an outstanding company that makes super high quality gear. And then you can start stepping down into lower tiers beyond that. Like I said, Great River makes a fantastic one. And so there's just, you've got Heritage Audio that does two different levels over there in my rack. I've got one of the Heritage Audio units that has also their clone of the EQ. So it's a Neve preamp and EQ built into one 19-inch rack. And I think that sold for, I think I paid maybe $1,100 or $1,200 for that, which is, but that's, then you can step up the higher, more expensive Heritage Audio part of that. You're going to spend probably closer to $2,000 for something like that, or a little bit over that. So ultimately, in general, especially in the 500 series, you're going to spend on average anywhere from probably $650 to $1,000 on most mic preamps, and you can get some mic preamps in there. I think it's perfectly fine to go with a company like Warm Audio. They make decent ones. Now, you'll find a lot of people will talk about Golden Age and things like that, and they can do a decent job. In my opinion, I just don't think it's worth. I think it's better to save your money and collect a few $100s more and get something a little bit better. Of course, you can make great preamps, and something like a Golden Age is going to be much better than what you have in your existing interface, most likely, depending on the interface, of course. Some of the more high-end interfaces are going to have much better microphone preamps. Now, you also have companies like Stephen Slate, as an example, Universal Audio. You have several of these companies out there that have their microphone preamp emulations, and I think they can do a decent job, but it's never going to be, well, I'm not going to say never, hopefully it will be at some point, but today I don't think you're going to get apples to apples in that situation. So, but if that's all you've got, then go that route. That's, it's interesting, and it's certainly a good way of at least exploring that to get a feel for kind of what that feels like. So microphone preamps can be an outstanding addition to your project studio. And so if you're just somebody that's out there recording no more than 2 channels at the same time, then buy yourself a pair of something. If it's primarily one thing the majority of the time, let's say you're never needing to record anything 2 different microphones at the same time, then maybe you want to get a Neve and an API clone. As an example, that could be a good way to start. And like I said, there's a lot of great manufacturers out there that can get you into the ballpark of that, whether it's Warm Audio, Capping, or some of those that do a great job on theirs. We've also got companies like Stam Audio that do a great job as well. However, you just have to be prepared to wait on that company because they've been really hit or miss lately, especially with what they've got going on with their bus compressor. It literally took them years where people place an order and it was years later before they got it. So they went through a rough patch. I think that's done down in somewhere in South America. I can't remember where. But anyway, their products are good. So, as always, do your homework. Don't just listen to a guy. Don't listen to one person like me. Like, I'm not actually reviewing a specific particular preamp at this point. I will be doing that at some point. Or at least demonstrating, I should say, the character. I'm not really into reviews per se. I may do certain things, but I've got to really believe in it before I do that. But I'm always going to give you an honest review. I promise you that. I'm going to say the good and the bad. I'm going to put it all together for you if those points happen to be relevant to whatever I'm talking about. But so anyway, microphone preamps can really help you improve your recordings, especially with vocals and things like that. But understand what you're trying to go for. So do some more research into both. Like Sound on Sound gives great reviews. You can trust typically what they say. Tape Op as well. Those are just guys in the industry who have a tremendous amount of wealth of experience and knowledge. So if you get a review from Tape Op or Sound on Sound, you can pretty much be pretty confident that you've gotten a really solid review on a piece of gear. So anyway, kind of get educated on that when you find out which direction you want to go first. But then again, like I said, if you buy used, that shouldn't be a problem, because if it ends up not being what you like, you can always sell it. If you sell it and buy something else, you can realize, well, I like the one I sold, well then sell the one you've got and then buy the next one. That's why buying used is always your best bet. Now, when you go into the 500 series, understand that you're going to have to make that investment into a 500 series power source, okay, where you can mount those 500 series pieces of hardware, albeit there's all kinds of stuff, but predominantly compressors, EQs, and microphone preamps. There's lots of other things you can do in there too, but those are the most popular. And so that's going to set you back on average about $450 to $500 used to get one of those. So consider that in the cost, but it's worth every penny, especially if you're planning on expanding your hardware. Now, if you're not if you're not like the rest of us, maybe you're one of those isolated guys that just says, I just want one microphone preamp. I don't want any EQs. I don't want any compressors. I don't want any of that stuff. I'm just going to do one. Then buy a 19-inch rack version of something and go with that. Because obviously, what you don't want to do is buy an 6 or 8 slot 500 series power source / mounting unit, if you're only going to put one thing in it. So ultimately that's a way to go. So kind of think about these things. Ultimately, they can help you a lot. But my first, if you are looking to expand upon, let's say you go with a 500 series type or format, and you are wanting to expand in things beyond microphone preamps, then I would say don't buy more than 2 microphone preamps and start getting into compressors and EQs after that, that you can utilize as hardware inserts in your DAW. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in another video. So I hope this video gives you some perspective on really what to look for, what to consider when looking into microphone preamps. As always, I truly appreciate you guys spending the time. I know my videos can be somewhat long and somewhat long-winded, but ultimately I want to try to do the very best I can to fully explain, what some of these things mean and where they come from, and then what advantages you can get. I like to be able to speak to folks from different levels, whether you're beginner or whether you're advanced in your journey. I'm going to try to make something in my videos that help everyone along the way based upon my own experience and, quite frankly, my own mistakes. So, little plug here. Like, subscribe, notify down below. Really helps me. I'd like to grow this channel for one reason and one reason only, to help everybody like you. And then I guess I got another reason. If I can make a couple $100 a month doing this and I'm buying some more gear, some more preamps and compressors and EQs, well, you better believe I want to do that. I'm addicted to that stuff. And yes, I'm addicted because I love it. But I've made some mistakes. I've got some gear in here I should have never bought. Okay. Don't know why I bought it. It was crazy for buying it. So that's why I'm giving you advice to don't make some of the mistakes that I've made. So really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me. I hope you like what we're talking about here. I'm always willing to accept any feedback. If I'm doing something you don't like, or if you've got some advice on how I could be better at this, please leave it in the comment section. You're not going to hurt my feelings, because I truly want, I do this to try to help people, honestly. And so I hope I've helped you at least in some way today, because you're helping me, because I feel good talking about this stuff. So until next time, I'd like for you to have a great day.